They thought I had nothing left. They thought 63 years of living had finally broken me down to something small and forgettable. And standing in that courthouse hallway, watching my son-in-law straighten his tie and whisper something into my daughter's ear that made her laugh, I let them think exactly that. My name is not important. What matters is that I built something. 41 years ago, I started a small plumbing supply company out of a rented garage in Dayton, Ohio. Just me, a used pickup truck, and a list of contractors I'd cold called from a phone book. My wife at the time, my first wife, Margaret, used to pack my lunch in a paper bag and leave it on the hood of that truck every morning before I woke up. She believed in me before I believed in myself. When she passed from cancer in 2009, I thought that was the worst thing life would ever hand me. I was wrong. 3 years after Margaret died, I met Diane at a church fundraiser. She was warm, she was funny. She wore a yellow dress, and she laughed at my terrible jokes. I was lonely in a way that I hadn't admitted to anyone, not even my own reflection. We dated for a year, married quietly in my backyard with just family and a few close friends. My daughter Carol was there. My son-in-law Derek stood next to her, shaking my hand and smiling wide. My business partner of 20 years, a man named Hank, was my best man. I thought I was starting over in the best way. The company by then was worth somewhere close to $4 million. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because that number is the reason everything that followed happened at all. The first year of the marriage was good. The second year was quieter. By the third year, Diane had started spending a great deal of time with Carol and Derek. Family dinners at their house twice a week, shopping trips that lasted full days. At the time, I told myself this was healthy. My wife had a good relationship with my daughter. What kind of man complains about that? But there were small things. A phone call she ended quickly when I walked into the kitchen. A weekend trip to visit Carol that I was not invited to join. She said I'd be bored, that it was just going to be the two of them at a spa. A new savings account she mentioned once, and then never mentioned again. I asked about it once. She said it was nothing, just a little personal fund she was building. I nodded and let it go, because I had spent 41 years trusting people, and that habit is not easy to break. The thing that woke me up was not dramatic. It was a Wednesday afternoon in November, and I had come home early from a meeting that got canceled. I walked through the back door and heard Diane on the phone in the living room, speaking in a low voice, with a particular kind of calm that people use when they do not want to be overheard. I stopped in the kitchen. I did not announce myself. What I heard was this. My wife telling someone, and from the context it became clear. It was my daughter Carol, that she was worried I was getting forgetful, that I had been confused about finances twice last week, that she thought it might be time to talk to a doctor, that maybe Derek should take a more active role in the business accounts. I stood very still in that kitchen for a long time. I had not been confused about finances, not once. I run a $4 million company. I can read a balance sheet the way some people read a menu quickly and without effort. Whatever story was being constructed about me, it was not built from truth. I did not walk into the living room. I went back out the door, sat in my truck, and thought for a very long time. Then I drove to the office of a man named Gerald Foss, an attorney I had used for business contracts for 15 years. I sat across from Gerald, and I told him what I had heard. Gerald is a quiet man who does not show surprise easily. He listened with his hands folded on the desk. When I finished, he said 3 words. We start documenting. That was 14 months before the court date. What followed was the most methodical 14 months of my life. Gerald helped me engage a forensic accountant, a woman named Patricia, who spent 6 weeks going through every account connected to the business and to our household. What she found was not a theft in the dramatic sense, no single large withdrawal that would have been obvious. It was smaller than that, and more patient. Over 2.5 years, just over $280,000 had moved through a series of transfers from a joint household account Diane managed into an account in Carol's name, and then into a third account that was held jointly by Carol and Derek. $280,000. Not all at once. Never more than $8,000 in any single month. Patient, quiet, and deliberate. Patricia also found something else. 6 months prior to our marriage, Diane and Carol had met with a financial advisor together. I did not know my wife before our marriage had any connection to my daughter. Diane had told me they met at my backyard wedding. The advisor's records showed differently. I want to be honest about what those weeks felt like. I am 63 years old. I have buried a wife I loved. I have run a business through 2 recessions. I thought I understood grief, and I thought I understood difficulty. But sitting in Gerald's office, going through those documents, looking at transfers dated 3 months after my wedding, 8 months after, 13 months each one, a small, quiet decision that someone had made about my money and my life, that was its own particular kind of pain. Not sharp. More like cold water filling a room slowly. He did not confront Diane. Gerald advised against it, and I agreed. I went home every evening. I sat at dinner. I talked about the weather, about a football game, about a neighbor's new dog. Diane would pour 2 glasses of wine and we would sit on the back porch, and I would look at the yard I had landscaped with Margaret 30 years ago, and I would feel the specific exhaustion of a person keeping a very large secret. There was one evening, about 8 months in, when Diane touched my hand across the porch table and said she thought I seemed tired lately. She asked if I was feeling all right. I told her I was fine. I told her I was just getting old. She squeezed my hand and said that was nothing to worry about, that I still had plenty of good years left. I thanked her. I poured myself another glass of wine. I thought about Patricia's spreadsheet. The second thing Gerald and Patricia discovered was an attempt to move more significant assets. A meeting had been held between Carol, Derek, and a different attorney, one who specialized in elder law and conservatorships. The meeting had taken place 4 months before I discovered any of this. They had not filed anything yet, but they were building a case that I was mentally declining, that I was no longer capable of managing my own financial affairs. Gerald believed the plan was to wait another 6 to 12 months, document a few more incidents of supposed confusion, and then file a petition with the court to have me declared incompetent and have Derek appointed as my financial guardian. Once that happened, the company would follow. I want you to understand the completeness of what had been planned. This was not impulsive. This was not opportunistic in some casual way. This was a long, considered architecture. My daughter and my wife and her husband had sat in rooms together before my marriage to Diane, it now appeared, and they had looked at what I had built, and they had decided that the most efficient way to get it was to wait for me to fall in love with someone, and then to take it piece by piece while I was busy being grateful not to be alone. Gerald filed the legal response on a Tuesday morning. The conservatorship petition had finally been submitted 2 weeks earlier, and that was the moment Gerald had been waiting for, because now everything was formal, everything was on record, and now we could respond with everything Patricia had documented. The hearing was set for a Thursday. I wore a gray sweater and dark pants, not a suit. Gerald suggested I not wear a suit. He said a suit would look like I was performing. He said what we wanted was for me to look exactly like what I was, an older man who built something with his hands and his patience, who did not need to perform anything for anyone. I understood what he meant and I trusted him. Carol and Derek arrived at the courthouse with their attorney, a man in a dark blue suit who carried a leather briefcase and walked with the particular confidence of someone who expected to win before the first word was spoken. Diane was with them. She was wearing the yellow dress. I do not know if that was intentional. I have thought about it many times since and I still do not know. They saw me in the hallway. Derek looked at my sweater and then looked at his attorney, and something passed between them that was close to relief. Carol said good morning to me in a voice that was almost kind, the kind of voice you use with someone you have already beaten. Diane did not say anything. She looked at the floor. Their attorney opened the proceeding by presenting a document package, the supposed incidents of confusion. A note from a Dr. Carol had taken me to see 8 months prior, under the pretense of a general checkup, 3 signed statements from neighbors, and a former employee describing moments of forgetfulness. It was neat. It was well constructed. Sitting there listening to it, I could see how, to someone who did not know what I knew, it might look convincing. Their attorney sat down. Derek had a small smile he was not entirely hiding. Carol's hands were folded on the table in front of her. Gerald stood up. He did not raise his voice. He never raises his voice. He submitted Patricia's complete financial analysis, 18 months of documented transfers, the timeline, the account structure, the pre-marriage meeting between Diane and Carol and the financial advisor. He submitted the records from Carol and Derek's attorney. showing the conservatorship had been in planning for over a year before it was filed. He submitted phone records showing 47 calls between Diane and Carol in the 2 months immediately preceding our marriage, during the period when Diane had claimed she barely knew my daughter. Then Gerald submitted one more document. It was a letter, written in my handwriting, dated 14 months ago, the week after I had stood in my kitchen and heard my wife on the phone. In that letter, I had written down everything I remembered about my finances with perfect clarity: account numbers, balances, business valuations, a complete inventory of assets, notarized, dated, addressed to the court. The letter existed for one purpose: to demonstrate that 14 months ago, the man they were claiming was confused, had a clearer and more detailed knowledge of his own finances than most people have of their own names. The judge read it. She read it slowly. The courtroom was very quiet. Then she looked up. She looked at Derek first, then at Carol, then at their attorney. She set the letter down on the desk in front of her, with a deliberateness that I will not forget as long as I live. She said she had some concerns about the petition. She said those concerns were significant. She said she was going to be referring the financial documentation to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential fraud and elder financial abuse. She said she was dismissing the conservatorship petition in its entirety. The gavel came down. I heard Carol say something, a single word, but I could not make it out because there was a sound in my ears that I think was just the blood moving through my body, the way it does when something that has been held under pressure for a very long time is finally released. Gerald put his hand on my shoulder. I nodded. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair and I buttoned it slowly, the way you do when you are in no hurry, when you have exactly nowhere more urgent to be. 3 months later, the prosecutor's office filed charges: elder financial abuse, fraud, and conspiracy against Diane, against Carol, against Derek. The divorce was finalized before the criminal case concluded. I will not detail everything that followed in the legal proceedings except to say this: the $280,000 was fully documented, and full restitution was ordered as part of the criminal sentencing. Carol received 2 years probation and community service. Derek received the same. Diane received 18 months of supervised probation and was ordered to pay restitution in full from assets divided in the divorce proceedings. Their attorney, the confident one with the leather briefcase, filed to withdraw from the case 3 weeks before sentencing. People have asked me since what I feel about my daughter. It is the question I least know how to answer. I have given it more thought than I have given almost anything in my life. What I have come to is this: Carol made a series of choices. She made them over a period of years. She made them with full knowledge of what she was doing, to a man who had never done anything to her but work hard and try to give her a decent life. Whatever happened between us, whatever door that closed, she was the one who closed it. I did not close it. I still live in the same house. The yard is still the one Margaret and I landscaped 30 years ago. The plumbing supply company is still operating. Hank is still my partner. We had lunch last week at a diner we've been going to for 20 years, and he ordered the same thing he always orders and complained about the same things he always complains about, and it felt like the most ordinary and valuable hour I have spent in a long time. I turned 64 last month. A few people from the office came over. Hank brought a cake, the kind with too much frosting that you have to drink a full glass of water after eating. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by people who knew me before any of this, who had never wanted anything from me except my company. I thought about the courthouse hallway, Derek adjusting his tie, the relief on his face when he saw my gray sweater, the certainty of people who believe they have already won. Patience is a strange thing. Most people think it means waiting. What it actually means is building quietly, carefully, without announcing yourself until the moment when everything you have built is exactly what is needed. I built a company for 41 years. I built a legal case for 14 months. I am not a complicated man. I am just a man who learned, very early, that the work you do when no one is watching is the only work that ever truly counts. The gavel came down, and that was enough.